Do you have an interest in local history? Enjoy interviewing and have some time to volunteer? Then talk to us about getting involved with our heritage projects. We're bringing history alive on your local radio station. Call GravityFM for more details on 01476 573300.
St Vincent's of Grantham is one of the top Gothic revival mansions in the UK. Built in 1865 as the home of the local industrialist Richard Hornsby, St Vincent's Hall is most famous for being the operational HQ for Group 5 Bomber Command during the Second World War. The dam-busters were coordinated from St Vincent's Ops Room. On the night of the raid, Arthur Harris, Barnes Wallis and the RAF High Command awaited the news when within St Vincent's. Sit back and relax as Ella takes you on a journey in the history of St Vincent's House, starting with Malcolm Knapp.
Well, it's a great privilege to talk to you. This is Malcolm Knapp with us today. He's a local historian and an author of how many books, Malcolm?
21.
21 books. Held in very high esteem locally, I know this. So, would you like to talk to us about St Vincent's Hall?
Yes, St Vincent's. Now, the River Witham was the eastern side of Grantham for many, many years, until the 1850s. After that happened, lots of houses, the bigger houses, big stone houses, on the east side of the river were where the very wealthy people of Grantham built their houses to keep away from the smog, smoke, smells of the industrial part of the town further down on the other side of the river, the western side. And that's what happened. And St Vincent's was one of the houses, one of about half a dozen that were built on the east side, mainly of stone and very prestigious. And of course most of them are still there in different forms and for different uses. St Vincent's is one that I've been in and on and under and enjoy it, because I was asked as a guide to do a program on it on the television by looking at St Vincent's, and it was a sort of people wanting to sell the house and wanted to publicise it. And one of the places I saw that I'd never seen before, or actually even knew of, was their cellar in St Vincent's, which was precast concrete down there and strengthened, the ceiling of the cellar strengthened by railway lines, the rails itself, because that was the place that was used in the Second World War for the headquarters of No. 5 Group Bomber Command. And that house was it, and it was strengthened just in case. And it was very fascinating. Me being 6'3", I had to be very careful about hitting my head on a railway line, which wouldn't have bent very much, but it was something I'd never even knew of, or obviously never seen. And it was quite fascinating.
These are metal.
Oh yeah, they're proper railway lines.
Oh my goodness.
Yes, there was across the ceiling, to hold in the ceiling of, and of course the rest of the house as well. Yes, it was something different. It was to fortify against bombing by the Luftwaffe. So that was something better. And we also, of course, had a complete tour of the house, the lot, and even to go right up in the top to their little, well, it's called like a pepper pot.
I think I've seen
yes, you've seen that mentioned.
It's called a candle snuffer.
That's right.
Yes.
Candle sniffer top, which was a beautiful place to sit and look at the views of all over the town. And I then realised that if Mr. Hornsby, who had the house built, was sitting up there enjoying the view, he could see in the distance Hornsby's factory. And I put the thought to the people coming around with me that Mr. Hornsby could sit up there with his binoculars and make sure that everybody got into work, and if anybody was late, he got them.
He was keeping an eye on his workforce.
Yes, he was. Oh, it could have been, yes. Whether he was, of course, I don't know, but it was possible. But the house, it was superb. It has numerous owners since it was for Richard Hornsby. I can't remember all of them, but there's certainly the bigger ones, later ones, after the Royal Air Force left it. Ailing Barford used it. SKDC used it.
Yes, it was a
Then it became for at least two families the family home.
Oh, right.
And it was a very nice one. It would have been ideal for me with all our books.
You could fill it with your books.
Yes, but I couldn't afford it.
No.
But yes, it's a very attractive house and a very attractive position looking over the town. Yeah. Here's a little piece that's just been found about St Vincent's, and it's entitled The Checkered History. I think this was from one of the freebie newspapers when I was writing articles for that. Built sometime just after 1865, St Vincent's was the impressive house and home of Richard Hornsby, and it remained in the possession of the Hornsby family until 1905. The name of Paravicini is also always associated with St Vincent's, for it was bought by Percy Chandos Farquhar de Paravicini in 1911. After he had already lived there for several years. And then he goes on to say the same thing as I've already said. The house was next sold to the Air Council in 1924.
So what have you got there, Malcolm?
This is a photocopy of a catalogue of St Vincent's, Grantham, of valuable surplus household furniture and effects. The sale was by Escrit and Barrel on Tuesday, November the 22nd, 1921. By instructions from Colonel C.V. Paravicini, who is leaving.
Right.
So we've got more information there. Sale to commence at 11 o'clock precisely.
Precisely.
Yes. Now, if you wanted to go, it's a charming grandfather clock, mahogany, copper, Adams overmantel mirror, French china cabinet, chairs, Chesterfield settees, decorative china, bronze statuette, doesn't say of what, cartoons, oil paintings, watercolours, coloured, sporting, etc., prints, engravings, etchings, photogravures, oak bedroom suites, plural, chicken runs, that's a change, poultry houses, and part of a stack of hay.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, that covers every eventuality.
Every port, yeah.
So let's try and piece this together. I've got a note here that says in 1924, Percy Chandos de Paravicini sold to the president of the Air Council for £6,500.
Yes.
So that's when it first went to military ownership.
Yes. And there's a difference in the cost as well, isn't there? Between that one and the one later on.
Yes, then it
and
went
the one that we've been talking about, more recent than ever, up to £1 million.
Up to £1 million.
Yes.
Yes. And part of the grounds were sold to George Wimpian and Co.
Oh, yes.
So that would have been the housing estate.
Yes, yes.
Oh, that's brilliant. So this is the building firm.
Yes.
Wimpian. What did it stand for again?
We improve each year.
So the price for St Vincent's in September 1977, it went for £51,000 in an auction. That's amazing. It went to a private ownership to a solicitor, but you really would have thought it would have been worth considerably more than that.
Well, it was later on, yes. Yes, when I was going around looking at the house for television purposes, the owner was anticipating, possibly, hopefully, but well over £1 million.
Yeah. Whenabouts are we talking?
No, we're talking about now probably 5 or 6 years ago.
Right, brilliant.
Yeah.
So according to these notes that you have, the house was purchased in 1987 by Suter PLC.
Yes, he was a businessman,
Right.
And I think he used to work for Evelyn Barford for a while before he left to set up on his own.
What else do you know about St Vincent's and the Dam Busters raid?
Well, that was the great publicity one. It wasn't such a success as they thought initially, because the Germans very thoroughly got themselves back into rebuilding the dam and clearing up all the mess. But it was good for publicity when things were not going all that well for Britain at that time. But it was organised and arranged, and what else shall we say? Organised is the best word. From Grantham, from St Vincent's. The aircraft, of course, didn't come from Grantham. They came from Scampton, and they were Lancasters. It was an expensive raid. More than half of the aircraft were shot down, and crews either killed or prisoners. But it was good for publicity, and it raised our hopes that we were doing something. It was followed in the same sort of manner with the 1,000 bomber raid, which was good publicity, and we thought we are at long last hitting back. But the Dam Busters raid was very, very well done, very well organised, and very efficient, because they did damage 2 of the dams drastically, and another one was sort of damaged, but not so much, because it wasn't made of concrete, it was made of soil, and that absorbed the explosion.
Right. So not so much impact.
It didn't burst. But yes, it was. And the film, the film starring Richard Todd, of course, as the leader, does in fact mention Grantham.
Right.
In the film.
Yes. We had some wartime celebrities there sometimes,
we've
didn't
had
we?
all sorts of celebrities in Grantham during the Second World War. Sports people came and performed. Billiards and tennis, they did. There was a sort of football match in Grantham, Stoke City versus West Ham United, for a charity match. That was good. We had the Cossacks and their horses, and on St Peter's Hill. No, I tell you a lie. No, on London Road football ground.
Oh, right.
That's where that was, and they were good. I remember those, and I thoroughly enjoyed them. Other people came, and to one to my mind was the American Army Air Force Band under the direction of Major Glenn Miller performed in the State Cinema one Sunday afternoon in 1944. My uncle, who was the deputy manager at the State Cinema, said to me, "If you want to see the concert, I can let you in the side door. Then you can come up to the box and watch." I was 13 at that time, and obviously still a big band fan. But I didn't go.
Why?
I don't know. There must have been a reason why I didn't go, whether I've still got too much homework, whether I backed out because it was going to be illicit and illegal sort of thing, or what. I don't know. I can't blame anybody, myself, my uncle, my mother, or what. I just didn't go. And now people in Grantham, one lady in particular, whenever I was talking about it, she'd sit there and say, "I went."
We had Bomber Harris. He came.
Oh, he lived here. Yes.
Did he?
Oh, yes. He lived in Grantham. Whilst the headquarters of the Number 5 Group Bomber Command was in Grantham, he was here.
Right.
Later on, in about 1943-44, it moved up to Bawtry in Nottinghamshire, and he would have gone with it. Yes. But,
I believe Leonard Cheshire came to St Vincent's as well.
Who?
Leonard Cheshire of the charity.
Well, yes, he was. Cheshire was one of the very lucky pilots. He did Lord knows how many trips, and got attacked several times, but survived, and won the VC and all sorts of other medals as well. But no doubt he would come to Grantham. All the Number 5 Group, which was the prestigious group of Bomber Command, because they'd all got Lancasters, which were the best of the aircraft of the lot. Others, Number 6 Group, was further north, but they had Halifaxes, which were not as good. They couldn't get as high as the Lancaster, and they couldn't carry as much or go as far as the Lancaster could. and they had a better rate of survival than all the others. The Stirling wasn't good enough. It couldn't raise its height more than about 13,000 feet, which was no good at all, because that was the really good raise that the German anti-aircraft gunners could get them, and they lost far more than any of the others, Lancasters or Halifaxes, and eventually they were taken out of being bomb command. They then became glider tugs instead. All sorts of strange things happened.
We now hear from the local historian, John Pinchbeck.
St Vincent was originally the dream of industrialist Richard Hornsby, who had done so much for Grantham in building houses, churches, and of course the biggest industry in town. Unfortunately, he died in 1868 before it was finished, so his son Richard Jr. Moved in and remained in the Hornsby family till the early 1900s. Trustees sold the house to Henry and Alfred Manners and Henry Bell, the corn merchant, and they in turn leased it to Percy Farquhar Chandos de Paraficini, who also he bought it later. Mr. Paraficini was responsible for owning a lot of land in this area, including Turner Crescent, which he donated the land for. His daughters were Sheila and Christa, and they were debutantes in May 1930, presented to their Majesties at Queen Charlotte's Ball. They wore identical long frocks of parchment-coloured net and light satin bodices and shell-pink neck trains. Sheila Paraficini, incidentally, married John Headley Lewis, the county councillor, and they moved to his house at Berkholme Manor, Corby Berkholme, just down the road from Corby Glen. Sheila, incidentally, bought the first of the new Rovers that came out in the 1970s. Lovely lady. She soon traded that in, though, for the latest sports car, the Triumph TR7, which she told me once she could get down to the London nightclubs much quicker in that one. She was quite a big jazz fan and apparently played drums to records of Count Basie. In 1890, one of the tenants at St Vincent's was Charles Sidney Wentworth Reed, who was riding his horse one day along Bridgend Road when a boy threw a stone at him. So he chased him, caught him by the door of his home and struck him several times with a cane. He told the court, "I did it out of kindness to the boy to teach him better. I intended to hurt him, because had I not done so, he would have taken no notice." Magistrates said the boy deserved all he got, but as Mr. Reeve had pleaded guilty, he had to be fined, which was 5 pence with 50p costs in today's money. The case against the boy for stone throwing was dismissed on payment of 45p costs. So, in other words, he got 10p discount. Yes, St Vincent's. A lot of people are intrigued how the name of St Vincent's came about. And it's the same with St Catherine's Road, and it's the same as Norman Lee's, the other house on Beacon Lane. They're all named after fields. St Catherine's Road was originally called Cemetery Road because it was the road to the cemetery. But who wants to live on Cemetery Road? So they thought, well, the cemetery was built on St Catherine's Fields, and that's why it changed its name. Similarly, St Vincent's Field was next door to it. Evelyn Barford bought the house in 1977 for $51,000 and put in its AB International branch. Then it was only 2 years later that they managed to sell it to South Kesteven District Council for £205,000. Nice little earner that was. This was to replace the council's prefabricated buildings, the former hostel at Sandon Close, which had been condemned on safety grounds. If I remember right, that was mainly the planning department. In about 1986, the court moved its office staff in there while extensions were built at the back of the London Road Court. the registrar office moved there as well, but not for long, and so the district council then put it up for sale, and it was bought by Suter, an engineering group, Suter International, run by David Abel. They stayed there probably 9 years, and it was who in turn was bought out by Ascot.
We're talking today to David Abel. David is Executive Chairman of Jordan plc, and he was previously Chairman and Chief Executive of Suter plc, and also, I believe, a Director of British Leyland Limited.
Correct.
What can you tell me about how you arrived in St Vincent's Hall?
Well, after I left Leyland, I started building up a small business called Suter plc, which initially had sales of a few £100,000 a year. And I bought the Priory in the marketplace, but we soon outgrew it and started looking for bigger premises in the Grantham area. And we heard that the ex-council offices at St Vincent's had become available, and so we put in a bid and we ended up buying it.
You had some sort of romantic attachment to it.
Yes, it was really, because that did make it more interesting. An uncle, a very close uncle of mine, had been in the RAF and had what appeared to be a gilded life, really, in that he survived an enormous number of forays over Europe as a fellow dropping the bombs, and I think the rear gunner on it, and you were expected to have a life expectancy of about 4 trips, and I think he made about 30, so everything seemed to be fine. Unfortunately, it all came back to haunt him 30, 40 years later, and he had to retire from his job. I don't know, the sort of trauma that people have after being in war. But no, that obviously did make it more attractive, and in fact, as I think I told you earlier, I had the office in which the whole operation was planned.
And what was that like? Could you concentrate on your work knowing that you were in that room?
Yeah, very easily, yeah. No, it was a very attractive room. Obviously I chose the best office for myself, so and obviously whoever planned it all did the same. But no, it was a very attractive building, and we restored it really to what it had been when it had been built.
What sort of restoration work did you have to do?
I can't detail it all, but enormous amounts, not just painting and decorating, but really sorting out the original floor tiles and all the cornices and everything else. We tried to do a proper job of it. And
some of the windows had been sealed off, I think, haven't they?
Yes, some of them have actually been bricked up. So obviously we unbricked all those, and they were all okay underneath. It was like sort of, as I did in the home that I moved into in Grantham in 1977, pulling out all the bricks that had been used to brick up the old fireplaces. So it was a bit like that, really.
So would that have been a security issue? They'd be closing off windows?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was.
For the use it had as a planning office.
Mm.
So did you have a lot of interest in the office that you had in St Vincent's?
Yes, we did. Various enthusiasts would come knocking at the door at various times and express interest in seeing the building, and we'd always agree for them to be shown round. And that happened, yes, on a considerable number of occasions.
Did you do the tour guide yourself?
No, I'm afraid not.
So you got one of your staff to do that?
Yep. Yeah, I mean, we had something like 30, 40 people there at the end by the time we were taken over many years later, and then they in fact got rid of the building. It was sold as a private house. So
David, was there any media interest in St Vincent's?
Yes, there was. I can't remember which particular anniversary of the bouncing bomb raid on Germany it was, but certainly there was interest then. And yes, TV crews came around and took photographs and so on. So, yeah, but not a lot.
A fascinating place to work, though.
It was, and it was a lovely building. It had real character rather than just a sort of egg box, a sort of square box somewhere. It was really attractive, and I don't know, it lifted your spirits when you walked in every morning. It's very, very Victorian.
But eventually you did have to move on.
Well, we were taken over, and the new owners of the business decided they no longer wanted it, and they wanted the high life in London, so relocated to central London, to much grander circumstances in Hanover Square.
But you stayed locally?
I stayed locally. I sort of got the bug. I think it was a smashing area to live. And I live in the Vale of Beaver. I'm very fortunate. And that really, after I gave up most sports, because at 40 odd you're really past playing soccer and so on, it gave me a new life really, because I got interested in horses. And as most people know, I've had a reasonably long career as a racehorse owner. And in fact, we bred racehorses as well.
Did you name any of them after the St Vincent's?
I didn't name one after St Vincent's. Some of them got local names. In fact, my stud was called Branston Stud. So everything that we bred ourselves and then ran in our own name, and we didn't run them all because we had to sell some, obviously, to keep up the cash flow. But everyone was prefixed with Branston, which is the village I live in. So you had Branston Abbey, which was the most famous. And she, I think, still is the most winning mare in post-war Europe. She won 24 races in about 7 countries and took us as far afield as Hong Kong and all over Europe.
So the next one, Branston St Vincent.
I don't think it has quite a ring to it, but I think one of the most recent horse I named is called Crowson Kerrill, which is the village adjacent to ours.
Thank you very much for talking to me.
Pleasure.
And I'm talking to Mrs. Pamela Cox, who is a Grantham resident. You've lived here all your life, haven't you, Pam?
Yes.
I'm doing this piece on St Vincent's, and I think you've got a connection through your father.
That's right, he used to work there.
Would you like to tell me about it?
Yeah, he worked on the switchboard with a Mr. Snell.
The one with the famous son?
Yes.
Yes, he was
harpist. Yeah, I just remember it being a grey building, a bit like a court. A little bit further down the road, they built a fabricated building that actually belonged to all the aerodromes in Lincolnshire and the surrounding places where the aerodromes were. And that was private. And Dad did 6 hours, then Mr. Snell would do 6 hours, and then go back into the St Vincent's on the ordinary switchboard for ordinary people to ring in. But nobody else could ring in that prefabricated place because it was all under the Secrets Act, which Dad had to sign. He signed the Secrets Act. He used to work at Ruston and Hornsby's, and he knew the men he'd been invalided out of the army. He got this job at the GP, I think it was called, and he was looking for a job to get himself established because all the forces was coming home, and he knew if he didn't make a move he wouldn't get a job. So he saw this aerodrome, RAF Spitalgate, advertising for a maintenance man to cut the grass around the landing places. So he applied for it and he got it. And somebody must have been looking at, I think Dad called it his resume. Resume.
Yes.
And they said, "Yeah, this man's wasted on this job. He shouldn't be grass cutting." So whoever he was talking to said, "Why?" They said, "Well, he was an RSM in the army." He says, "And that's not a rank, it's a title." He says, "You've got that job coming down at St Vincent's, why don't you ask him to apply?" So Dad thought he was getting older when they asked him to apply for it. They never even interviewed anybody else. He got it straight away. And he finished his working life there. But they moved from St Vincent's, and they went into, now let me think what it's called. Would it be called St Vincent House in Elmer Street, where the Red Cross took over? And he finished his time there, where he retired from.
But you used to go and see him at St Vincent's?
Yes, I did. It was, as I say, it was a nice building, but it reminded me very much of that court at the bottom of Nursery Park. It was airy. He got this scroll. Everybody signed it, and when he was really poorly, he asked me if I'd emptied the house that him and Mum used to live in, and I said yes. He said, "Did you find a scroll in my tool boy. It was like a little wardrobe at the bottom and 3 drawers. And I said, well, yeah, I did, but it was sealed with like a sticky red stuff, you know. He said, well, I want you to go over there tomorrow and tear it up, because it won't be of any interest to anybody.
Oh, and it would have been, wouldn't it?
It would. And the next day he died, you see. So
we don't know what was on it.
No. But there was a lot of names, because he did open it once, but not enough for you to read them all. Because they do say he met some quite high up ranks in the forces that weren't allowed to say who he was, you see.
And he'd signed the official secret.
Yes, he did, yeah.
My name is Jim Shortland, and I have been researching RAF operational history for the period 1943 to 1945, and I live in Sleaford, Lincolnshire, and have done for all of my life. When I got into this particular squadron's history, number 617 squadron, for that wartime period, immediately you look at the squadron's history, you have to realise that they took part and formed for the new 617 squadron that would be based at Scampton. But at that time, the headquarters of number 5 Bomber Command was at St Vincent's in Grantham. The headquarters had been at St Vincent's for since the late 30s, and the first head of 5 Group was Arthur Harris, who eventually became Bomber Harris, head of Bomber Command. The St Vincent's was a family home, and in the early part of 1943, around late February, Guy Gibson was called, where he was just completed his tour with Bomber Command at RAF Syston, and he was called to St Vincent to see if he would take part and lead and form this new squadron. He went to St Vincent's and accepted this opportunity to lead and form this brand new squadron for this one and only operation. He thought it could well have been the Tirpitz, which had been a major threat to the Atlantic convoys taking supplies from America and the UK around the North Cape into Yagognik and Archangel with supplies to the Russians. He accepted the post, and from there the squadron were formed at Scampton, and the raid took place. But for the raid, Barnes Wallace, who was the chief designer of the mine, the upkeep mine used for the dams raid, he was the chief stress engineer at Vickers, who were making the Wellington, and Sir Rex Pearson was the chief designer. Often people give Wallace the credit for designing the Wellington bomber, when in fact he was responsible for the complicated geodetic structure of the Wellington that was part of his airship design when he was building airships up at Howland. He decided that for the raid he would fly from Weybridge, Brooklands. He flew from Weybridge up to Scampton in a Wellington flown by the chief test pilot, a guy called Mutt Summers, and he was there for the pre-raid brief. So when the 19 Lancasters had taken off to go on the raid, he then drove down from Scampton down to St Vincent's and was joined by Air Chief Marshal Bomber Harris, who had no doubt come up by train to Grantham, picked up in a staff car and taken to St Vincent's to be at St Vincent's for the period of the raid. The raid took place, and the various signals that were sent to and from the aircraft that were over Germany were sent back from the aircraft, in particular Gibson, who on part of the raid near the Wilhelmina Canal encountered some unknown flak, no doubt from a mobile flak gun. So his WASP operator, Hutchison, radioed back, i.e. by Morse code, to the 5 Group radio receiving station that was a single brick-built building just off the High Dyke. The remains are still there, but you're not welcome because it's not safe. But he radioed back these flak positions. That was translated and by telephone landline was then transmitted by telephone down to St. Vincent's. The reason why they had a satellite radio transmitter receiving station, because St. Vincent's being down in the dip near the River Witham in Grantham, it was too low to get a signal without they had a huge aerial, a massive aerial to get over the Spittlegate Hill area right out to the North Sea. And it was transmitted by radio, by telephone, down to St. Vincent's, where the senior wireless operator in St. Vincent then passed the message on to Air Chief Marshal Cochrane and Wallace and Harris the results, and then messages would phone back and they were retransmitted back out to the other aircraft. And when Spencer Smith wrote his book Time is Flying, I went to see him about it and I talked about this, and he said there was no transmissions that night. And I said, oh dear, knowing that it was wrong, because I had a copy of the radio report where various messages were transmitted by Morse code to the High Dyke station and so on. So it was a interesting concept that the St. Vincent's played such an important part for the particular raid. There were other raids that 617 Squadron took part in, and St. Vincent's would most likely have been part of that. But it was certainly one of the most important aspects of the dams raid. Many years ago I did a lecture down in Somerset, and one of the old men there had a photograph album with some pictures of the dams. So I introduced myself and asked him who he was, and he said my name was Squadron Leader Jerry Frey. Now I knew that this man, I didn't know at the time, but I found out that he was the photographer who took the pre-dams raid photos and the post-dams raid photos of the photographic reconnaissance Spitfire. So he said he went over and took the pre-dams raid photographs, in other words, did a photographic survey. He then got back to RF Benson where they were printed, and was then told, take this brown envelope containing your photographs, take it up to Spittlegate, you'll be met by a staff car, don't hand this envelope to anybody, you're going down to 5 Group headquarters near the airfield. And he told me that the staff car picked him up, parked the aeroplane in the car, down the hill into St. Vincent's, through the guard posts to meet Cochrane, who was the air officer commanding 5 Group, handed him the envelope, and he thanked him very much and went back in the car, back up to Spittlegate, and then took off in the same Spitfire done the photographs back to RF Benson. And as far as he was concerned, that was the end. And then after the raid, on the morning of the 17th of May, he was told to prepare to go again and do the post-dams raid photographs. And I said, so that was 2 trips in about 5 days. He said, yeah. I said, well, how were you selected? He said, well, normally there is a league of pilots similar to a football league, that when you did an operation at the top, you then went to the bottom and you kept moving up. Whatever the task was, when you got to the top, you did it. You had no choice. But they made an exception, he said, with me, having taken the pre-raid photographs and knowing my way around the Ruhr area of the dams, I was sent 4 or 5 days later to do a repeat of it. Well, of course, they were all daylight with his pictures. The Spitfire had no machine guns, had no means of defence. All it had was its speed and altitude, and then he took the post-raid photographs. And I found that interesting to listen and meet the man who actually took the pictures and brought them to Spittlegate to be examined by, no doubt, Gibson, then at Scampton, probably came down to look at the very latest photographs that he'd taken. But of course, in the meantime, Jerry Frey had gone back to Benson, and Gibson would all be dealing with it, because Gibson at that time would be a very, very busy man. Having met people who were aircrew at the time of Gibson being there, have commented that Gibson was not a particularly nice man. One particular man said, "I couldn't stand him." Yet when I spoke to David Shannon maybe 25, 30 years ago, David Shannon said what a marvellous man he was. And I did point out to the bomb aimer who didn't like him, I said, what you've got to appreciate is that Gibson was a very, very busy man. He didn't suffer fools gladly. There was a serious time element, because they needed to attack the dams when they were at their maximum winter, spring rainfall, because the way the weapon was going to be delivered and function, the less water there was in the dam, the less effective the weapon would be. So they had a very tight time scale, and also not only the weather being right, but also the cloud and everything surrounding low-level flying at night had to be taken into consideration. So the time was running short. The last they could do it would perhaps be during the 20th period of May 43. After then, they'd be using the water and so on, and the weapon would be less effective. The weather wouldn't be right. It was quite a complicated procedure for all these boxes to be ticked for the whole thing to work. But it wasn't in the best of situation, because of the 19 aircraft that took part, there should have been 21. Instead of being Gibson's Wave 9 and the second Wave 6 and the third Wave 6, because two of the crews in the second and third wave, one of each group as a crew member ill, so instead of being 9, 6 and 6, it went as 9, 5 and 5. So right from the very start it didn't go quite well, and with the casualties of which 8 aircraft failed to return, 56 airmen failed to return, and of the 56 failed to return, 53 had died. So there's a lot of casualties. 3 were POWs, and when eventually Wallace got the details, it was very sad that 53 airmen failed to return. He wouldn't know of the 56, he wouldn't know at that time that 3 were POWs, and he wouldn't know that 53 had died, because the casualty situation going to the British Red Cross took weeks and months rather than hours and days. One of the important aspects of the raid was the radio communication between the 19 aircraft over Germany and St. Vincent's, and a system had been devised by, no doubt, Wing Commander Wally Dunn, who was the senior communications officer in St. Vincent's. He probably worked out the code letters rather than the aircraft sending back, the Lancaster water operators sending back by radio. They were sent back by Morse code, and they had a system of code words, so if they were intercepted by the German people looking for signals, they couldn't interpret what there was. So various code words were produced. For example, the word pranger, radioed back by Morse code to the receiving station at the High Dyke, then by phone down to St. Vincent. When they received pranger, it meant target X, which was the code letter for the Myrna Dam. The target X was the Myrna, target Y was the Ada, and target Z was the Sorpy. And when they breached target X, which was the Myrna, they Morse coded nigger. That coincided with Guy's black Labrador dog that had been killed in a road accident the night before. And various others were Morse coded back. For example, the word goner meant that the mine had been released. So they would do Pranger, target X, Myrna was being attacked, then the Morse code Goner, bombs released, then eventually they'd type the word nigger, target X, which was the Myrna had been breached, then they would divert to target Y, which was the Ada. All this meant that the Germans could not pick up the correct details, so it was all done by code letters for the entire operation.
It says tulip number 2.
Tulip meant number 2 to take over control at target X. Tulip would be second in command, would have been in this case probably John Hopgood, probably. That was in case Tulip would be Pranger, attack target X, Goner, bomb released, Tulip. Now, if in the case of Gibson being shot down on his first, because Gibson was first to attack, if he was shot down and crashed, then Tulip would be number 2 take over control at target X. So whoever number 2 was, it could well have been John Hopgood, Mick Martin and so on, would have taken over in the event of Gibson being shot down. So that all these code words were covered, like Apple, first wave, listen out on button B. So they'd be receiving this from St. Vincent's on button B. Listen out on button B. Quite a complication that nobody mentions. And then they type out mermaid, jamming on all radio transmitter controlled by wireless transmitter.
I'm Ella Watts with GravityFM, and Graham Gill, who is the current owner of St Vincent Hall, has very kindly offered to show me around. Thank you very much for that, Graham. It is lovely to be here. What am I looking at now? Where am I?
Okay, so we're in the entrance hall to St Vincent's here. You can see that there's an original Minton tiled floor here, which is the original one that Hornsby or one of his team would have chosen probably from a catalogue. And should you want a Minton floor like this yourself, actually this company is still going in the West Midlands, actually. Very, very popular and fashionable in the Victorian era, but yeah, the firm actually still continues to this day. It's a Minton floor with these incredible blue columns, very deliberately placed in the entrance hall. There are 3 to the left and 2 in the middle. They would have been by far head and shoulders the most expensive thing in the house when it was built in the Victorian era. We now know that these are coming from an extinct quarry in the south of France, somewhere in the Côte d'Azur area. And whilst you sort of walk past them today, marble to Victorians would have been very exotic and grand, and of course Hornsby would have instructed his architect to put the showiest and most beautiful thing in the house in the entrance hallway. The chapitals of these columns, they're a little bit worn actually. We don't know what's happened to them, but there are actually some columns on the upper floors that are in better condition to these. I think it was quite fashionable in the 20th century to paint these and then sandblast them down, which I'm afraid has taken a lot of the detail off, but you can still see the birds and flowers and various details that are in these columns, which is very unusual. I think the fashion at the time, these were called stone leaf designed. And they're fantastic examples. We actually have had a couple of architectural historians come here just to have a look at the columns actually, because stone leaf was very fashionable in the Gothic revival period, which is what this house, the style of this house, Gothic revival. There's a fireplace in here now. That's something that we put in ourselves very recently. It's an original fireplace that Hornsby would have had in there when he built the house. It warms up the centre of the house. But none of the fireplaces in the house are original. The ones that we've opened, we've found the remnants of the original fireplace behind, which would have been a white Carrara fireplace. So every fireplace in the house at the moment has been replaced by renovations in the last sort of 10 to 15 years. But on that fireplace there's a plaque. The plaque is part of the listing. Plaque reads 5 Group RAF Bomber Command Headquarters, St Vincent's, July 1937 to December 1943. And the council put a brass plaque there as well. The house, the previous owner Tony Connolly spent 10 years effectively as a labour of love renovating the house and bringing it back to a family collection and a family home. And he started to put together a Dam Busters and 617 Squadron and 5 Group collection, which he very kindly and generously left in trust when we bought the house. Some of these are on loan actually. You can see that this one's actually been loaned by Jim Shortland. Several of these are from Jim Shortland, but several of them actually came with the house, and they're pictures of notable 617 Squadron raids and obviously the Dams raid. The large picture here is an oil painting of those that were decorated in the 617 in the Dams raid coming out of Buckingham Palace, being led by Guy Gibson, of course, who's just received the Victoria Cross. And there are 1 or 2 other pictures that all sort of relate to that RAF period. We call this the Gibson room because there's a large oil portrait of Guy Gibson staring down at everyone in this room. It's one of those portraits where the eyes seem to follow you around the room, so it seemed appropriate to call it the Gibson room. Yeah, we have a snooker table in here. It's funnily enough, it's a 1920s snooker table, 1920s, 1930s snooker table, but we put it in only a couple of years or so ago. So yes, it's not contemporary with the house, I'm afraid. But yes, again, there's more of the Dam Busters, an RAF themed collection that I was discussing when we were in the hall here. Lots of pictures and people such as Barnes Wallace and radio operators, etc. that were here on the raid. We can see in this room that actually the ceiling is a modern ceiling. It's sympathetic to the style of the house. It's in a Gothic revival style, but I think what this room shows us is quite how much the usage of the house has changed. The floor plan of the house today is totally unrecognisable from when the house was originally built, and you can see that in the ceilings and the plasterwork on the ceilings, in that we think that there's at least 2 staircases from the original household that are not in the house today. And again, with all of the changes of use from Hornsby through Paravicini through to the RAF usage and the post-war office usage, again and again and again, the floor plan changed and there were walls knocked down and there were temporary walls put up. And so when this was a wedding venue, we know that there were people married in this room as well as in the hall and as well as in our sitting room. I think they moved the actual place of the ceremony around several times when it was a wedding venue. We know that when this was for use by the Air Ministry, there was a corridor through this room to a blast-proof planning room, briefing room that was outside the building here. You can see that from the scar on the wall when you go outside, and there's some archaeological evidence of foundations and aerial footage that we've seen of the blast-proof room that was directly outside this room. Okay, so this is the sitting room. It's probably the nicest room of the house, this is. If you look up, there's the original Victorian plasterwork that would have all been made by hand. A lot of it would have been made in situ, and again it would have been one of the prize rooms of the house. We also know that during the war this was the commander's office, so this was almost certainly the room that Gibson came into to sit down with Cochrane and understand what his targets were for the raid. We also know that during the war there was a typing pool off of this room and several outbuildings off of this room, but the ceiling shows that this room has been pretty much intact from day one. There are very few rooms that are like that in this house, and you can see that in here. There's a nice fireplace in here which the previous owner Tony Connolly rather nicely dedicated to 5 Group. He had the crest of 5 Group carved into the fireplace. As I say, all of the fireplaces in the house are modern, but rather nicely dedicated this to 5 Group. Today in the sitting room, dominated by a portrait of an oil-based portrait of Hornsby, who is brandishing his patent. I think that's the Ackroyd patent, the Hornsby Ackroyd engine. or it may have been an earlier agricultural engine. But that was effectively, that piece of paper is possibly the piece of paper that paid for the house's construction. So this is our dining room. Again, we think this is probably an original, you can sort of tell from the plasterwork again that this is probably an original room from the floor plan. There are portraits of Barnes Wallis and Harris, and also the King when he visited the 617 Squadron after the Dams raid in here, as well as a couple of bits and pieces from Lancasters and various planes and things that were associated with 5 Group. There's also a rather interesting picture of St Vincent's during the war, and you can sort of see the rather unsympathetic blast-proof briefing room and typing pool that they just sort of built onto the house. I guess during war they had no real planning restrictions in those days, obviously not if you look at that picture. But again, it was a very busy place. I did actually meet a guy a couple of years ago who was in 5 Group. I think he was based up at Woodhall Spa, and of course I asked him, did you ever come to St Vincent's during the war? And he said, no, I never came to St Vincent's because I was never in trouble and I was never begging for leave, and they were the only 2 reasons to go to St Vincent's during the war. It was a very stressful place with people coming and going, life and death decisions being made every day, and so yes, people tried to steer clear of it unless there was a very serious reason to come here. We believe there were over 200 people stationed here during the war. Obviously back in those days there was lots of porter-cabins and outbuildings and places around St Vincent's. These are modern windows. You tend to find that the ones nearer the top tend to be more original, because actually the ones at the top you can see are the old Victorian glass. They're rolled glass rather than the Pilkington glass, so you can see that they're a sheen to them. I forget which one's the modern one, which one's the old one, but rolled glass, I think Pilkington patented modern glass, which is rolled glass, and if you look at this you can see there's no reflection, none at all, perfect, whereas the Victorian glass is all, I can point out, I can say that's a Victorian pane of glass there. I can show you that outside, so it's easy to see. In terms of the windows, yes, there are a lot of stone windows.
We now continue our tour outside.
Yeah, so we have the same, the previous owner engaged the stonemason at Grimsthorpe Castle. We actually use the same stonemasonry. You can see he's done lots of restoration on the stonework at St Vincent's when the RAF were here, and the logistics after them, and also the council. There was a bit of damage done to the house. You can see some scars here that relate to kind of corridors. I think this scar particularly here, there was a sentry point built onto the entrance here, so there's a man with a gun stood where I am now looking at everybody that came in. So this was a sentry point here. We had that restored. You can see, as I say, that's Gary from Grimsthorpe Castle that's helped do that. And you can see there's a big scar across the side of the building here and up through there where the blast-proof briefing room was attached to the house. You can see it here as well. But most of the house is in good condition. As I say, there are some things that relate to the Second World War, where they were knocking holes in walls to build corridors. There are some things that relate to the kind of post-war period, whether it's the council or whether it was the companies that owned the house, and they did restorations such as putting the wrong type of stone into the building, which unfortunately leads to quite expensive repairs. Actually, it's almost worse to put the wrong type of stone in than to not put any stone in. But we know it's Ancaster stone with a Yorkshire sandstone. It's Mansfield red sandstone around the skirt of the house, and the features inside are all built out of Clipsham limestone. So when we arrived, I mean, we were moving from Asia to St Vincent, and pretty much all we had to do was move our stuff in, which was fantastic. But the garden was a bit of a blank canvas. I think Tony, the previous owner, was a little bit burnt out bringing the house from what was something that was semi-derelict to a modern family home. So we've done quite a bit in the garden. We've restored the original Victorian rockery. There's several slopes in the garden, and as we dug down we could find the original stones underneath where the slopes once were, which, I mean, obviously a lot of those stones were weathered, but we had to replace most of those stones. But we have actually replaced that rockery and also the original Victorian sunken garden.
Did you have some plans to work on to know that it should look like that?
That's interesting, yes. We had some aerial photos from the pre-war period. I mean, the original feature in the middle, that was already there. In fact, actually, our stonemason looked at that and he said that's probably older than the house. It looks as if it was probably restored or reclaimed in the 1860s from somewhere, particularly this middle section. But yes, we know that there was a square path, so we've restored that. Yeah, it made it look a little bit more modern. But yes, it was from some original type of plans, yeah. So this is the west face of the house. It's the side of the house that had, we know, both the typing pool as well as a corridor down to air raid shelters, as well as the blast-proof briefing room. And you can see actually this is the side of the house that has had the most restoration work done to it, and probably the most still to be done. And there's quite a few scars down this side from where some of these buildings once attached to the house. The restoration has been done sympathetically, but still rather a lot more to be done there. This is the turret, which is quite an unusual original feature, of course. Some people call it a Gothic candlewick turret. Very pretty. It's got the quatrefoils on the turret. We had this restored last year, because whilst the combination of stones is very pretty, the red and the buff colour, unfortunately the red Mansfield sandstone weathers at a much quicker rate to the rest of the building. So you can see the columns on the turret on this side, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, we had to have actually replaced, or half of them replaced, because they were getting thinner and thinner with the weather hitting the building on this side. Actually, you can also see on this side as well that the window sills. It's a very pretty original feature of the house. What you find is that Gothic revival houses that feature stone leaf have these beautiful window sills, and obviously the foreman on the site, that when they were building the house, would have said to the masons, go for broke, just do as pretty a window sill as you can possibly imagine. So if you look at it, every single one is actually different. Everyone on the entire house is different and probably done by a different mason. And in fact, if you talk to stonemasons today, they probably say there was probably a competition as to who came up with the prettiest window sill. I'm not sure who would have won that. They all look pretty good to me. See, this one's got grapes, this one's got plums on it. They tend to be, it's quite a fruit theme going on, but they're not all fruit, it must be said. This one's sycamore leaves here. This one, I think, is a chestnut leaf. They're all very different anyway. Yeah, so we're at the entrance porch here. It's a beautiful archway, a beautiful Gothic archway with bells across the top and bells on the left and the right. We actually, again, talking about the columns, we had to replace the 2 columns at the entrance hallway as well. They had become quite weathered as well, so going back to the original quarry, we got the same stone and a mason to come in and replace those 2 columns. I mean, we're on the side here. It's the side of the porch, and originally there would have been a service entrance here. The service entrance is gone now. We know there was a service entrance there because we've seen very old photos of the house before the war, and there was a coach light and a doorway in there. But just above that doorway we have our only grotesque. This is a grotesque rather than a gargoyle. Of course, the difference being that gargoyles have water coming out their mouth and grotesques are just there for decoration. And it seems to be a lion or something like that. We've absolutely no idea what that means. But given that we don't know who the architect is, we think that's probably the signature of the architect. That's the nearest we've got to a lead on who actually designed this. Yeah, one of the things that really attracted us to St Vincent's, having lived out in Shanghai for sort of 6 or 7 years, was the garden. We have, I think it's 42 listed trees, a listed preserved wood, and a listed grouping of trees over by the garage, which we really enjoy. We've got a couple of resident badgers, some muntjac that live here, lots of rabbits, all sorts of wildlife. There's a kestrel, there's a peregrine falcon, I think, in the corner as well, similar to one that is down by the church, I think, and a family of red kites in the corner. and kestrels behind the garage. Oh, and also several owl boxes in the wood. So it's great being in an oasis of wildlife, as well as an incredible collection of woodpeckers here. We have spotted woodpeckers, normal woodpeckers. A lot of it comes, of course, from the field next door, but yeah, a lot of wildlife.
Well, we do put Grantham on the map a little bit. Obviously, there's quite a following of aviation heritage and Air Force tourism. And whilst this is a private house today, we have had a number of groups that have contacted us who want to divert trips that they're doing to Grantham to sort of see St Vincent and see some of the aviation heritage that there is in the Grantham and South Lincolnshire area. Actually, just a couple of weeks ago, we had the Danish Veterans Association. They had over 100 people that came here it was a pre-arranged tour, of course. We also had groups from Holland, small group of Americans, also some aviation enthusiasts from, I think, the northwest and the south of Lincolnshire. If it's pre-arranged, we take them in, we show them a couple of the rooms, and then generally send them towards the Grantham Museum or into town to spend their monies in the shops and the cafes about Grantham. So we do have a very strong connection to the Grantham Museum. I'm a little bit involved in the Grantham Community Heritage Association through the board there, but I know that the Grantham Museum are planning a very large event, an exhibition next year, of course, for the 70th anniversary of the Dam Busters. They've got some really interesting things planned for that. Hopefully there may be an open day of St Vincent's and one or two other things happening about the museum for that. Of course, Grantham is one of the few places in the country where you can see so much Dam Busters memorabilia. There's actually even a fragment from a bouncing bomb there, which there's not too many of those on show.
I'm with the Grantham Archaeology Group, talking to David Hibbett and Angie Hibbett. Thank you very much for agreeing to talk to Gravity FM.
So David, how did the archaeological group come to be digging at St Vincent's?
Well, it's quite a funny story, really. We were approached. Well, Graham sent me an email, and he says, I might have something interesting in my back garden. Would you like to come and have a look at it? And as the local group, we always get this sort of email, but you have to take everyone seriously, because one day somebody will have something unusual in the back garden. So I wrote back to Graham, and we arranged a visit, and it turned out it was at St Vincent's house. Straight away I thought, this is going to be interesting. There's quite a bit going on around there.
David, tell me about the first time you met Graham Geel, the current owner of St Vincent's.
We went up with a view just having a chat with Graham, and it was in the winter. It was cold, it was snowing, it was raining, the drive was slippy, it was freezing. Went up in ordinary footwear, knocked on the door. This lovely chap, it was Graham, answered the door and invited us in, and we had a bit of a chat and a cup of coffee, and he says, I suppose I ought to take you around the grounds now. And we were all looking at each other and looking outside and getting the woolly hats back on, and Graham wandered out in his slippers and had a wander around, and he says afterwards, maybe you ought to come back a bit later when it's a bit lighter and warmer and drier. And to be honest, ever since then we've got on like a house on fire.
It's a brilliant building, isn't it?
It's a fantastic building, full of history, lots of little quirks in it. I believe it's an iron building, which is brick or stone clad as well, because of the Hornsby connection.
So what can you tell me about the secret bunker?
Graham had heard that there used to be a secret hidden bunker in the grounds of St Vincent. Nobody was quite sure where it was, so he called us in with a view to just asking if we had the equipment or the people that maybe we could locate this bunker. And we thought, well, that shouldn't be too difficult. Big underground bunker, you can't miss it. Couldn't be further from the truth, to be honest. When we started doing the research, clearly there was documentary evidence to say there was a bunker, but there was a few misconceptions about it. We weren't sure if it was above ground, if it was underground, if it was under the house, if it was under the grounds. To start with, we had no idea where to start looking for this bunker.
Angie, you're the researcher. The research for this must have been absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, we were told that this bunker existed, and there was
documentary evidence relating to a bunker, but considering this is only 70 years ago, it's already fallen into history. The people who could tell us about it are most are no longer here, unfortunately. We did have a couple of leads, and we had people come to show us where they'd worked at St Vincent's many years ago and showed us where it should be, but again, nothing documentary to actually confirm this. We've done research through the National Archives, through local archives and various areas, and there's just been absolutely nothing to show us where it could be. Literally, we thought somewhere there'll be a map with X marks the spot, and yes, there are maps and there are military maps from the war, but absolutely nothing to tell us where this bunker may or may not be.
But this would follow on as well with the fact it was meant to be secret. The whole St Vincent's estate was militarised. There was sentry posts, there was gun emplacements. The whole thing was one big military secret. We realised quite early, like Anne just said, it wasn't going to be on any maps.
So could you give me a step-by-step guide how to find a bunker?
Step-by-step guide on finding a bunker. Right, well, there's no hard or fast methodology. We have to... Each site is unique. Each site will offer its own challenges. What we did to start with was collate all the available documentary evidence. This is historical mapping, oral history, personal accounts, interviews in books, which a lot of these, again, suggested there was a bunker. And the best lead we had was it was opposite the main entrance to the house. Now, the main entrance to the house is a very big drive and a hillside. What we needed to do to start with was to do some geophysical surveying. This is a non-intrusive method that penetrates through the ground and can show us where the archaeology is. Grantham Archaeology Group are fortunate in having access to some very high-tech geophysical equipment. So over a couple of days we geophysed all of the grounds of St Vincent's with some interesting results. When we looked at the data, we clearly had on one of the hillsides some curious anomalies that didn't look natural, and they were just starting to look man-made. So this is where we started the investigation.
So what comes after the geophysics?
Once we'd had the geophysics, it gave us some targets to go at. Normally what we would do is do 1 metre square test pits. Small excavations just to have a look to see what's going on in the ground. Graham was very keen to have a look at what we thought we might have found. When you invite an archaeology group into your house, it's clearly going to cause quite a bit of mess. We found straight away just how trusting Graham was of us. When we explained to Graham what we would like to do, he was very keen. Whether that continued when we brought the JCB in, maybe I should have asked him again. But to start with, we got the geophysical plots and targeted certain areas on the plots to put the trenches in. Initially what we found was building remains, hard standing like courtyards, and maybe some evidence for some small buildings. Further up the hillside we had a linear anomaly. This was about 1 metre wide, running for about 30 metres up the hillside. We thought it might have been a post-war pipe or maybe a water main, but we started digging by hand, and we went down through sand and disturbed deposits to about 2 metres, and it was like a scene out of a film. All of a sudden one of the diggers kept saying to me, this isn't natural, boy, this isn't natural, this is all disturbed. And with that his shovel hit something metal, and you couldn't repeat that. It was just like a film. X marks the spot almost.
This is like Grantham's very own time team.
It was, at that stage you wish you had cameras with you, because that is just how it happened. It wasn't orchestrated. He was troweling away and then digging with his shovel, and then all of a sudden Keith went clang, and it was like hitting the treasure trove.
And it's also worth mentioning that just like Time Team, it was at the very end of the working day, 4 o'clock in the afternoon. We couldn't carry on. We had to wait until we could return the next day to see what we'd found.
A cliffhanger.
A cliffhanger it was. A trench hanger.
A trench hanger.
What did you actually find?
Well, at the start we weren't quite sure what we found. Initially we had some safety issues because we were quite deep at this point, so we had to make sure this trench was safe. We had to step the sides out so it didn't collapse. We did a bit more investigating when we went back, and it looked like corrugated iron. Now, our research had shown many bunkers or entrances to bunkers or tunnels were corrugated iron. So straight away the alarm bells were ringing, thinking, ooh, have we found the top of the bunker?
So how did you progress from there?
At this point we spoke to our friends at the University of Bristol. He arranged for a film crew to come down and just to spend a couple of days with us as we continued the excavation. Not really filming what we were doing, they were really there in case of what we found. They wanted to be on site in case we did come across these two big steel doors with a big padlock on. But I think we'd all realised at that point what we'd found wasn't big steel doors. But we used the geophysics and we expanded the trenches down the hillside following this anomaly on the geophysics. And wherever we put the test pits in, or the small trenches, we kept hitting this corrugated iron. Some of it was horizontal, laid flat in the ground, some of it was vertical, and then we started to find timber supports for it as well. So if you can imagine back to what the First World War trenches used to look like, what were timber lined with corrugated iron sheeting, this is what we were getting. But this was Second World War archaeology, not First World War. We were soon able to join this feature up in the ground, and it was about 30 metres long with a dog leg halfway along it. And we carried on excavating, we got a machine in, which made it a bit easier for us. We spent a couple of weeks there, and this feature seemed to be some type of air raid trench or shelter. And it was a fairly big one, and it had power in it, it had electric lighting, it had communications. We found all this in the excavation. We found the remains of communication cable. And also, we found the entrance and the exit. Now, one of the entrances or exit had a nice preserved set of steps going down into it. One of the entrances also appeared to be brick-lined, and we're starting to wonder if this brick-lined entrance may have given rise to this misconception that there was a bunker at St Vincent's. Because if you're a young child playing in the grounds, nicking apples, doing things that kids do, if you've got a blocked up entrance going into a hillside, it's a bunker.
So why would St Vincent have a structure like this?
Well, although St Vincent's was initially a family house and built for the Hornsby family in the 1860s, it eventually came into the hands of the military. It was bought in 1922, and during World War II it was the home of 5 Bomber Command. Many people are aware of the fact that it was the home of the dam busters, in as much as the raid was planned at St Vincent's. The night of the dam busters raid, the signal to say that the dams had been breached came through to St Vincent's. It was a phenomenally important place. Now, if you've got important people on a hilltop above a town that's got munitions factories, etc., there's a very good chance that the enemy are going to be aware of it. You need somewhere to protect the important people that are working there. So the supposition would be there must be a bunker somewhere. Now, the bunker could have been under the control room that was attached to the house. We found no evidence of that. The bunker could have been in the hillside opposite the house, as was described. We found no evidence of that. There's also a suggestion that it was underneath the old stable block, which was further up Cold Harbour Lane. The stables were used as an area for communication. There is a possibility that to lead on from that, the bunker would be underneath, but that's all gone. That's all been taken away. There's new housing there, although again there is oral history of the fact that before the houses were built, there were lorry loads of concrete being taken away from there. That could be the yard, it could be the bunker. But there certainly would have been somewhere for these people to go, to be safe. St Vincent's house has got a huge Rapunzel-type tower on it. It's very obvious to anybody flying over Grantham where it is. I can't see that they wouldn't have had somewhere safe to go.
So you've told me you found an air raid trench. Did you actually find anything else?
Well, on the geophysics, close to where this air raid trench was, we had a large square anomaly. Now, by anomaly, what I mean is something didn't look quite right on the geophysics. So we had a little bit of a trench go into this, a hand-dug trench, and straight away we dropped down onto some smooth concrete. And we thought at the time, this is interesting, smooth concrete, could this be a ramp going down to a bunker? So we had a bit more of a look at it, and clearly at this stage it was too big for what we couldn't dig this by hand. So I trundled off to see Graham again, explained to him that we might have to bring a bigger digger in, and he scratched his chin and he ummed and he hawed, and he goes, well, I need to redevelop that area. Maybe it won't be such a bad idea. What we then did was bring one of the biggest mechanical diggers you've ever seen onto the site. Real big yellow, we used to call them the big yellow trowels. It turned up on a cold and wet morning. It was siling down with rain. I can't vouch for being there. I was somewhere else at this day, but I've seen the photographs from it. So maybe really Ange ought to pick this story up, because I got away with this one. I was in the warm.
He was very lucky. It was a disgusting day, but it was an exciting day. We had this little bit of concrete, which was tantalising. Brought the JCB in. Can we dig? Can't we dig? Is it too wet? Made the risk assessment. Yes, we can go ahead. So away we went. And he started digging, and he dug a bit more, and he dug a bit more, and to cut a long story short, we had what looked like a swimming pool by the time we'd finished. Concrete, square, high-sided, flat bottom, beautifully flat sides that had been plastered at one point in time, with a hole in the corner. And it transpires it was a World War II emergency water supply, with an area in the corner for the pump to pump the water out. Graham didn't know it was there. No document said it was there. When I researched into it, there was no reason it shouldn't be there, because it would have been needed to pump water to the house during the war, had it been bombed or had it been set alight. I did suggest to Graham that he might like to keep it as a swimming pool. He did decline. It has all been filled in again. But it was fabulous. It was huge. It was a wonderful find, and nobody knew it was there.
So is there any more work for your group to do at St Vincent's?
There's a lot, certainly related to the bunker and 5 bomber groups' activities there during the Second World War. We'd like to look more carefully at the prefabricated building, which has been described as either the briefing room or the command room. This was a big white building which was attached to St Vincent's. There's a possibility this bunker might have been underneath this building, but again, as we've referred to earlier, I don't think you'd have a bunker underneath an existing building, because those buildings are targets. But we would like to go back and have a better look, just to confirm that there is nothing there. But at this stage we certainly can't find anything archaeological. Going away from the Second World War activity on the site, there's a lot of Victorian archaeology in the grounds as well. So yes, we'd like to go back, we'd like to tie a few loose ends up. But the nature of archaeology is there'll always be another question.
And do you need any help in your group?
Yes, we're always recruiting new members. We'd like to hear from anybody who's interested in coming to have a bit of a dig. We're here, we're an independent or amateur group. We'd welcome people. You don't have to join straight away. You can, if you just feel you want to have a go at doing archaeology like you see on telly, we're the group to come to. We can arrange to have that sort of experience. And if you don't like it, at least you can say you've had a go.
And what's the correct title of the group again?
We are Grantham Archaeology Group.
And you do actually use some of the same resources as Time Team.
While we were doing the geophysical surveying, we had the opportunity for GSB Prospection to come in. Now, these are the people who do the geophysics for Time Team. And we know them quite well, so we got Jimmy in one afternoon with his ground penetrating radar equipment. And he rang over the main drive with it, because there is another reference to this bunker possibly being underneath the main drive. Although when you look in the cellars of the house, there's no evidence of a corridor which would lead to this bunker. But when we got the results back, there was an interesting square anomaly right in the front of the house. It's about 3 square metres, maybe 2 metres down. So we keep asking Graham whether we can dig his drive up. And he doesn't seem too keen on that at the minute. But I think what he needs is to have the whole drive block paved, which means when he's having it block paved, they'll have to dig some foundations for this paving, and then we may be able to sneak in and have a quick look.
Just to be clear then, what were the trenches that you found?
Well, funnily enough, after we'd actually dug them, we found some documentary evidence relating to them from the National Archive. And they were literally air raid trenches for the staff at the house. Now you had the people who worked in the house itself, who tended to be the higher ranking officers, and then you had the rest of the clerks, etc., who worked in the buildings that were attached to the house. And when an alarm sounded, there were various actions that the staff had to take. And one of these actions was to evacuate the building and the outbuildings and make their way to these trenches, to these slits. And some staff went to Trench A, some staff went to Trench B. Also, anybody who was out in a vehicle in and around the grounds had to park their vehicle up and make their way to the trench that we actually found under the trees. Once the alarm was over, there was some poor soul who had to remain in the building on the switchboard, and when all the all clear came, they had to phone through to the trenches to tell the staff to go back into the house or into the outbuildings. And the communications cable that we found during our excavations would have been the phone line going back to the house, so it ties them in beautifully.
So you have found out quite a lot. Is there any more to find out?
There's always more to find out. Yes, we have. We've done a lot of research and it's answered a lot of questions, but as Dave said, the more questions you ask, the more answers you get, the more questions there are. This isn't ancient history, it's only 70 years ago, but there's a lot that's been lost already. I firmly believe that there are people out there who know more about St Vincent's and can give me more of the meat on the bones, can tell me more about the day-to-day life of St Vincent's during the war, after the war, who can remember seeing it. And I'd love to hear from them. I don't want people to think, oh, yeah, they've done all the research, they're not going to be interested in the little bit that I can tell them. Yes, I am interested. It's just that little piece of the jigsaw that goes to make the bigger picture. So anybody who's got any memories, information, anecdotes, photographs, documentary evidence, anything to do with St Vincent's, I'll be delighted to hear from them. And it just helps to put the whole story back together again.
And does archaeology leave a legacy for the local people?
As archaeologists, we have to record all this work we're doing. There's no point just digging holes without recording what you do. So what we'll do with this, once the project's finished, or when we're almost finished, we will write up a technical report about what we've done. All the trench information will be in there, all the history will be in there, the background information. This will go into the National Archive. A copy will be deposited with Grantham Museum. There'll be one at the Historic Environmental Record at Lincoln. And then we'll also do a non-technical summary which just outlines what we found. This will be available to the general public.
We're talking to Peter Ball. Now I understand you did a dig at St Vincent's Hall.
Yeah, with the Grantham Archaeological Group, under the control of David Hibbett and John Gorry, we went to St Vincent to try and find the underground bunker. And we think it was probably an overground bunker. The people who know St Vincent's, it was built by Hornsby, I believe, and some of the pictures we've got shows a large white building beside the house itself, and a stairway coming from sort of the second floor of the house into the top of the bunker. So what you probably had, when we see the Dam Busters film, and you see them all in their headquarters, this is where they were at Grantham. This is where Barn Wallace was and all that sort of thing. And what you got was the officers were up on the balcony above looking down with all the people working below. No windows, so you feel like you're underground, but the possibility is that it was overground. We did some more work on there. We found, I think that they found a Canadian shoe from the period. There were also some trenches which looked like, I suppose it would be air raid trenches, but long, very thin, with lighting inside. When you went in there, you got an isolation switch for switching on the lights and that sort of thing. There was also a very large water tank, which was with sloping sides, which you find quite often on military sites, because if it had been bombed and it was on fire, the fire engines would come and they would roll their hose into this water dump, and so you could suck out the water, and it had the sloping sides because you didn't want your hose to kink and be at 90 degrees and therefore block the thing. And it's very common around bomb dumps that I know of when I was in the RAF. You would have these large water containers. So it's an interesting site, and I know that at one point they lifted up some form of manhole and found basically another room in there that nobody knew about. It just been covered up by a little manhole, and then inside was this room. So there's lots of different things. But the best people to speak to is the Grantham Archaeological Group, and they are doing talks on it as well. They're coming to South Witham next year to give us a talk on St Vincent.
Thank you. Well, we're going to have a look at one of Malcolm's books now. This one's called Landscapes and Legends, Grantham it is, and it's a book that Malcolm's done all the text, and there are some lovely paintings in it as well by Roger Heaton. So it's a lovely book altogether, collaboration. And you're going to read me part of it that refers to St Vincent's.
Yeah, well, it finishes off, puts it all together. Here we are. Grantham has an enviable military history, as will be read in this book. Where raids were planned or discussions were had, many of them were mooted in this building, some of which are still with us. St Vincent's, just off Harrowby Road, is one such building, put to military use, the Royal Air Force. During the Second World War, it became the headquarters of No. 5 Group Bomber Command, and no less a person than Air Vice Marshal Bomber Harris operated from there. The house is also well known as the place where the successful Dam Busters raid was planned and organised from. There is a plaque in the reception hall recording this fact, and Grantham is mentioned in the film The Dam Busters. The attractive mid-Victorian house was built shortly after 1865 for Richard Hornsby, and after several other owners was sold to the Air Ministry in the 1920s. This was one of several prestigious and large houses that were built on the eastern side of the River Witham after the river had been bridged during the mid-1860s. The house is set in almost 5 acres of mature trees and gardens, and has a fantastic view of the town, especially from the windows in the Candle Snuffer Tower, from where there is also an unobstructed view of where the Hornsby factory was in the 19th century. I wonder if Richard had a telescope. Other buildings in Grantham, mainly Victorian houses, were bought by the Air Ministry in the 1930s. They include Elsham House, now part of Grantham College, and Norman Leys, dated 1893, where Air Vice Marshal Harris lived during the war. It is now a nursery school. And that was written by me about 2 years ago when the book came out, Grantham Landscape and Legends.
Lovely,
and it's a superb book. I'm proud of it. But what is quite funny really, when people get it and buy it, they say, "Oh, Malcolm, it's a lovely book. Aren't the paintings beautiful?" Nobody says about my 20,000 words.
Every word is beautiful, Malcolm.
Yes.
I have a book by Spencer Smith, who is an ex-RAF man who lived in Grantham, and he was an RAF signals officer. He spent some of his days and nights on duty at 5 Bomber Group headquarters in St Vincent's. This was during the Second World War, and this book is called Time is Flying, and I thought this really gives you a flavour of how very popular St Vincent's was and how wonderful it was to be there, really. This is towards the end of the war, when it's alleged that the Americans threw them out of St Vincent's in November 1943. That seems a bit harsh, but they were, the Americans, in charge of a very important part of operations at that time, which was the movement of vast numbers of troops by glider, and they needed a headquarters. And this is what Spencer has to say in his book. "We picked them Morton Hall near Swinderby, which was well sited, and built them a complete set of huts for office use, and some of the dreadful Nissen huts which passed for living quarters. The Commanding General and his entourage visited St Vincent's, and Spencer Smith was told to show him around the DTN room. That's the Defence Teleprinter Network. This was really GPO property and territory. What Spencer says is he led this general around and explained the function of the network and answered queries. After about 20 minutes of listening to American voices, he nearly put his foot in it when the Commander General asked him, how much is this setup worth? Off the top of his head and in a very American accent, he replied, I reckon about $500,000, sir. You'll have to imagine the American accent. I can't do one. There was a moment of frozen silence, and Spencer stayed composed, but he was kicking himself inside for being a bit daft. But there was a pregnant pause, and I think the Commanding General decided he must have misheard. But he'd already seen Moreton Hall, so after he'd finished his inspection of St Vincent's, he went up to see Cochrane, and the conversation went something like this. The Commanding General said, well, I've had a good look round Moreton Hall, and I've enjoyed my look around St Vincent's. Cochrane said, splendid, and what did you think of Moreton Hall? And the Commanding General said, just fine. You move there, and we'll have St Vincent's.
You have been listening to the history of St Vincent's. We give our thanks to David Abel, John Pinchbeck, Jim Shortland, Malcolm Knack, Pam Cooks, Peter Ball, the Grantham Archaeological Group, and Graham Gill. And special thanks for the research and production, Ella Watts.
The Local History feature is brought to you by GravityFM in association with Your Heritage, awarding funds from the National Lottery. See www.hlf.org.uk.